Hey everybody, it's Chris Campbell, Vice President of Content and Client Relationships here at the Food Institute, and welcome to Food for Thought Leadership, our new video podcast that we're launching here. Really excited to have Mike Kostyo with us. He's Vice President with Menu Matters. If you are a fan of the Food Institute, you've probably seen Mike with us before doing some of our work, webinars, podcasts, etc. But if you're not familiar, I'm going to give Mike the opportunity here to introduce himself, and then we'll jump into today's conversation. So, Mike, throw it over to you here.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I'm a huge fan of the Food Institute. So yeah, I'm the vice president at Menu Matters, and we are a consulting firm that is 100% dedicated to the food industry. So Maeve Webster, the president, started the company 10 years ago with the idea of solving for a lot of the issues that the industry had around too much data. So we were all inundated with data and information. So really our whole kind of ethos is how do you make sense of the massive amounts of data that you have internally and externally. So it's purely consultative. We never know what our next project's going to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing the introduction there. And I'm going to set the stage a little bit, Mike. In December 2024, you joined us for our What's Ahead in 2025 webinar. And one of the big things that you brought up as far as 2025 need states for the consumer was going to be for something new. We have been inundated with nostalgia, and I'm, take a look at the calendar as we're approaching, 2/3 of the way, third part of the third quarter, right? We're almost done with the year already, which is crazy. I'm just wondering, in your mind, is this still a need state that needs to be fulfilled for the consumer?
Good question. Yeah. So to take you back to that research, so every year we do a big, massive study across the consumer base. So I think last year's was 2,500 consumers across the United States, Gen Pop, representative of the entire population. And we just take their pulse. What are you thinking about? What do you want from the food industry? What are your pain points? So 2024, we heard from consumers that they were having a lot of bad experiences, both in restaurants and also in the supermarket as well. So prices were high, packages were shrinking. They weren't necessarily seeing the service that they wanted to see, the hospitality. So for 2024, our need state was just take care of the consumer. At the end of the day, showcase to them that you have their back. So then we did that same study again the next year, and we actually saw something completely different, which is that consumers were actually fairly positive. They were pretty excited about 2025. And yet, on the same token, yes, they were not seeing the innovation that they wanted from our industry. It was 1 in 5 consumers said every time they enter the supermarket, they're seeing the same products on the shelves over and over, the same new releases. When they go into a restaurant, 55% of food experiences consumers say should have some new element to them. And we certainly see that's not necessarily the case. We're releasing a lot of nostalgic, based LTOs and new menu items, a lot of comfort foods. And so, yeah, for 2025, our consumer need state was just give the consumer something new, something to get excited about again. So have we solved that in 6 to 7 months? Not necessarily. Of course, we're still seeing a lot of the same kind of flavors, a lot of the same trends over and over, still a lot of nostalgia. But is the tide turning? I hope so. I think so. We've seen a number of the bigger brands, starting to open new R&D centers, new innovation platforms internally. I just saw an article this morning that General Mills is building a new $54 million innovation facility. I know Nestle is doing something similar. Mondelez has a new innovation platform. And so I think we are starting to see the industry understand that consumers want something new. But of course, it just takes time to build that infrastructure to make it happen. So I hope as we head into the latter portion of the year and then into 2026, we will start seeing some, major new releases and more innovation and interesting stuff.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you had brought up, or maybe a couple of things you had brought up during that presentation were, some of the need states beyond just, it being novel, but specifically, people are looking for bold new flavors. They're looking for sensory experiences. So I'm wondering, when you take a look at what the consumer is looking for specifically when they're looking for something new, are these two still top of mind? Are there other things that we should be thinking about as an industry when it comes to the consumer and these novel kind of eating experiences and sensory experiences?
Yeah, definitely. I think some of it when we talk about something new, a lot of times we think, okay, just throw a weird flavor into a new product and done, we solved. And instead, no, we should think a little bit deeper about what the consumer actually wants when it comes to something new at the end of the day. So in that research that we did, one of the things that we saw when consumers weren't necessarily really excited about the experiences that they were having in restaurants and to some extent at home with some of the CPG products was that they were totally checked out. out. They had seen the same things all the time. And so they would eat a meal, and the entire time they would be on their phones, and they're scrolling on TikTok and they're scrolling on Instagram. And if you ask them at the end of that meal what they even had, they couldn't even tell you what they had in that meal. And so when we were thinking through, the innovation work that really connected with the consumer and got them excited about the meal and got them to put down their phone, it wasn't necessarily about just throw something new in there. It was creating a fuller experience. So a lot of the innovation work we've been doing is around those new sensory experiences that you talk about. So if a consumer is going to put down their phone, it's because they want to pick up that, great new menu item that you've developed, and they want to get their hands on with it. They want to, have that cheese pull experience. They want to smell it coming out of the kitchen. When they walk into a restaurant, they don't necessarily want to see a line of kiosks and, they're going to go up and order, and then it's going to have a little message on their phone that, their order's ready. They want to see the chef's back of house cooking and the smoke coming out and the fire, and that's the type of innovative sensory experience that we're, really pushing our clients to innovate around because it gets consumers so excited. It gets them really engaged again.
Yeah, the sensory experience stuff is really interesting to me. I think, presentation of food has always been important, but, in the social media age, I think a lot of restaurateurs would be very happy for someone to pull out their phone, take a picture, put it down, and start eating right away, right? So I think that's probably the balance a lot of people are looking for in the restaurant space.
Absolutely, definitely. When you think of younger consumers and how it's not just they're on their phones when they're in a restaurant, they're on digital devices all the time. So sometimes when they go into that restaurant, that's the first novel sensory experience they may be having in a day. So you can really give them something unusual and exciting in a way that a lot of other industries may not have that opportunity to do.
Yeah, and I think, talking a little bit about this, I think one of the things I want to do with this podcast series is really kind of hone in on successful stories, kind of case studies. So I'm wondering, are there any examples you've seen this year of like a novelty play that really worked well on restaurant menus, something new that consumers really got, gravitated towards, I should say?
Well, I guess on that one, it's not necessarily a new menu item, but when I think of some of the brands who really killed it this year, in a year where it was definitely a difficult 2025 for a lot of brands from a traffic perspective, from a sales perspective. So when you look at some of the brands that were successful and why they were successful, one that jumps out to me is First Watch. I think First Watch does a great job in general with innovation. They're constantly introducing new healthy menu items that still have a lot of flavor that really speak to how consumers want to eat today. But I think the other thing that we saw them doing that's so interesting is they have, I guess it's a marketing/training platform that gives the workers in a First Watch restaurant the agency to give the consumer a great experience. So that can mean anything from, hey, there's, a table there and they have a little kid and you want to give them a onesie, to you want to give somebody a free soft drink. It's those types of experiences that when that consumer comes in and you just surprise and delight them over the course of their meal, that's the type of hospitality that I was talking about that a lot of consumers thought was missing. But it also adds to that experience that you're having that you can only find in a restaurant, that somebody's taking care of you. So I think First Watch, just from a kind of 30,000 foot view, they've thought through everything that the consumer wants today, and they're really killing it when it comes to kind of the innovative ideas that they're introducing.
Kind of reminds me of Unreasonable Hospitality, which you can see right here on my bookshelf if you're looking closely, but Will Guidara. So I think it's something that the industry should be taking a look at a little bit more. I know that sometimes it's difficult to do these kind of free things when you're operating a ton of different restaurants, right? But I think that personalized kind of experience is something people are looking for. To your point, we're in an era of AI and things are becoming more and more automated, but I do think food service specifically, people are looking for that human connection. It's part of the reason why they go out. They want someone to cook for them. They want someone that will be, helpful in bringing the dishes to them or even just telling them about the menu. So I find we're at an interesting crossroads in the industry where, things are getting more and more automated, but people really are looking for these human experiences. And I think a restaurant is one of the best places, and maybe, I don't want to say the last bastion, but one of the last places where you kind of have these, I don't want to call it non-tech places, but spots where people gather and kind of like retain their humanity. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, this is kind of one of the areas that we're most passionate about at Menu Matters. You know, we had seen 2 years ago in that 2024 research, it was about a third of consumers that said over the past week that they hadn't eaten a single meal with somebody else. And so we asked a follow-up question, how normal is that for you? And about the same percentage of consumers said, that's the norm for me. I eat about a third of my meals completely alone. And then that was an increase when you looked at younger consumers. And so then when we asked, you know, where are you actually, having some of those connection points and actually talking to somebody, it tended to be in restaurants. You know, sometimes it was that server that was the only person that they talked to over the course of their days. So do we have an opportunity as the hospitality industry to offer some of those connection points? Absolutely. I think we can really solve for that in a way that a lot of, the insurance industry or the tire industry maybe cannot. So, and to your point about Will Guidara, I cannot recommend I think any of us who have read his book cannot recommend it highly enough. But even, like you said, if you can't do the first watch thing where you're, putting, a hefty amount of your budget towards giving people a free option, he had a great newsletter the other day where he was talking about a UPS store in Florida. And that UPS store, they had given the agents there at the store the ability to give one customer every single day their order for free. So it was, so it's probably less than their marketing budget for billboards or, print magazines or whatever it was. So very low cost marketing. But it was not only so beneficial to the people that were coming in that had that great experience where it was a surprise during their day. I thought I was going to spend $30 and I don't have to. But it also gave those people that worked in that UPS store an opportunity to connect with that consumer in a new way, to give them something that was so exciting and, give them that positive moment. So it also becomes about training and keeping, your workers. And so I think there's a double prong kind of benefit to doing some of those things that allow the worker in your establishment to also be the hero of that consumer experience.
You really can fire up some word of mouth and social media kind of goodwill for your brand as well too, right? So definitely interesting. I'd like to shift a little bit. So, the title I'm thinking of for this episode is Nostalgia versus Novelty. And we covered the novelty aspect, but I think kind of complicating the matter is that it does seem like some consumers still want nostalgia. And while we're recording this, we're like at the very tail end of the Cracker Barrel firestorm.
Oh, Lord.
New logo to, now reverting back to the old one. So I'm wondering, how do you look at this? Is this something that brands should be avoiding like the plague, trying to go with nostalgia? Is this something that it really depends on, the company itself? How are you viewing nostalgia now? Because, obviously it's not going to go away completely. So how are you viewing that part of the, the argument when it comes to food service and maybe even CPG, if you see anything on that side?
I think you're exactly right. I think it's not going to go away. I mean, humans are nostalgic creatures by nature. We always kind of look to the past with those rose-colored glasses and think through the brands and the experiences that we had in our childhood in a way that just, seems so much better than the things that we experience today. So certainly we're not going to see it go away. On the other hand, have we overdosed on nostalgia? Absolutely. We are mining the, history of some of these brands and trotting out things that nobody was really asking for at this point. And I think the problem too is not necessarily that, yes, consumers do love nostalgia. They do like to see some of those brands. That's particularly true when times are tough and, you're looking back on your childhood and things seem simpler. And so it's kind of a shortcut to a simpler time at a time when I'm worried about the economy and global wars and things like that. On the same time, you start to train the consumer to never trust you to introduce them to something new. And so you go back to that mine of, old ideas and old products and old brands over and over again. And, over the course of 3, 5, 7 years, you can never introduce anything new again. And so I think that's what we saw with Cracker Barrel. A lot of the people that are so mad about Cracker Barrel also have not been to a Cracker Barrel in 10 years, in 12 years. And so, if they had kind of done the work of ramping up that consumer to expect some innovation, to expect some new ideas from them, I don't necessarily think they would be in this place. I mean, I also think there's a bigger thing going on here where we just latch on to these, cultural trends and chew them up and spit them out in a couple of days. And unfortunately, Cracker Barrel just got caught in the crosshairs of that. But I do think there's an element of when you mine nostalgia so much, you have trained your consumer not to trust you to give them something new in the future, and you paint yourself into a corner.
Yeah, and to your point about, the firestorms happening so quickly, I'm sure by the time this goes live, people are like, oh yeah, this whole Cracker Barrel thing happened in the course of a week, right? But I think that just kind of talks to how quickly some of these trends move. But one of the things I think that really kind of like ties in here is authenticity when it comes to nostalgia as well, right? It needs to be something that is tied to your brand ethos. It needs to be something that obviously was popular before. But I'm wondering like how you see that playing out, because I do think that there's the opportunity for brands to see, oh wow, customers like nostalgic stuff. Let's just do something that's totally out of our wheelhouse that, it could seem to be novel and nostalgic at the same time, right? Something that's novel to them, but something that had already been, kind of conditioned with consumers. So I think there's a lot at play here, but I'm wondering how you see authenticity playing into, whether or not a nostalgia play is going to be successful.
Oh, absolutely. I think consumers are savvier than brands think these days. I think there's a built-in skepticism to a lot of consumers when they see brands, launching every weird marketing campaign. You see it in the comments of TikTok and Instagram. Oh, another weird thing from X brand. And so I think this is actually a place that some of these legacy brands have a leg up. A lot of these legacy brands are so worried about being disrupted and some of the issues that they're having around these upstart brands introducing a lot of the cool new stuff. And it's the legacy brands that have some of the cooler, things in their background that they can kind of mine a little bit. So I think Cracker Barrel is maybe a good example. If Cracker Barrel had come out and they had said, we know what we stand for. We are a brand that, you have come to on your road trips since you were a child. You came here and you played the little, golf tee game at our tables. You, sat on our front porch and you sat in that rocking chair together. And we know that's why you love us. And so, we've taken that background and that history that we've had, and we have some new games for you that we've introduced to the table here. We've actually we're going to introduce little festivals that we're going to have on the front porch that play into this idea that we have, the rocking chairs out here. I think some of the idea that you can use that nostalgia and that, good faith people have in your brand as a launch pad to something new, that's an opportunity a lot of brands don't necessarily get in there if they're, a couple years old. So I think you should, yes, look at your past and think through what is authentic to your brand as a launching point for, the next generation of ideas, not necessarily just kind of sitting on your laurels and not innovating all the time.
So kind of a similar question to the first set I asked, but any brands or campaigns you're seeing right now where nostalgia is being effectively kind of leveraged to move sales for a company?
Who I think is doing a good job is A&W. So they have a new CEO, 𝗖cieःꯙ, and I follow her on LinkedIn, and she does a really good job of telling the stories of the franchisees and why they are franchisees and why they've been so passionate about the brand for 60, 70, 80 years, while at the same time talking about some of their new launches and why those franchisees who have been with the brand for so long are excited about those launches. So I think they're doing a really good job of showcasing, we are a legacy brand that has been a part of your community for years. We are supporting these small franchisees in your community, and yet we're thinking through, what does the future look like for A&W? So, we did in that part of that research this year, we asked consumers, what really matters to you when you're thinking through the new products that you want to buy. And for 55% of consumers, they said the thing that gets them to purchase a new product is seeing the person behind a brand. So a lot of times brands don't like to do it. Chefs in particular are like, I want to be back of house for a reason. I didn't necessarily get in this industry to be in commercials. But, I think it really does help to connect the person that's behind the brand, making those menu decisions, talking through the reason that they introduced something. Red Lobster, having their new CEO come out and talk through some of the mistakes that they made and why they're making the changes that they've made has really led to a lot of success for them. I think, showcasing that human person behind the decisions that you're making is so important for a lot of these brands.
Yeah, I say this a lot. It's kind of like in college. You go to office hours so your professor sees you. It's much harder to be failed when they have that face, right? So I think the inverse is true as well. There's a lot that can really go well for a company when you put your leadership in, especially franchisees, right? That's a great example. Kind of give them a little bit of the spotlight as well to showcase, it is a partnership, not just, corporate kind of telling people where to go. So very
Absolutely.
So I think I'd like to turn the conversation a little bit here. It's kind of like a blend of novelty and nostalgia. It's a little bit off the two topics there, but it's collaboration, right? And I put together a quick list of things we've seen the last couple of weeks. So Mountain Dew partnered with 𝗖𝗄𝘁 sour candies to make a new drink. And I think they did the inverse as well. I think there's a Mountain Dew flavored version of that candy. Pabst Blue Ribbon, believe it or not, partnered with Campbell's Soup for 2 soups. You had Tropical Smoothie Cafe partnering with Heinz for their ketchup smoothie. And even just last night, I saw, it may have come out a little bit earlier, but I just saw Sonic's partnered with Grillo's Pickles for like a pickle drink. What's going on here, Mike? It seems like everywhere we go, it's just collaboration after collaboration. And I'm wondering how that plays into all this as well, because you're taking typically nostalgic brands and smashing them together to create something new. So, are consumers responding to this? I got to imagine yes, since we're seeing so many of them. But, what's going on with this trend?
They are responding to it. It's funny. So there was a recent trend on TikTok where consumers were using AI to create the products that they wanted to see on store shelves. And a lot of those ended up being collaborations. I want to see the candy brand that I love in, a Breyer's ice cream. I want to see the cookie that I love featuring, some of the sour gummy worms or whatever it is. And so you definitely saw, particularly in younger consumers, the idea that collaboration is innovation in their eyes. I also think, too, it is an easy kind of, way to innovate or to introduce something new, particularly in a lot of these companies that have gotten so big and they've gobbled up a lot of these brands. Some of these brands are within the same umbrella corporation anymore. So it's a little bit easier to take that brand that's now under, your giant corporation and take that, sour gummy or whatever it is and put it into your product. I think also what you see so much of is it tends to be a lot of the sweeter flavors. It tends to be candies, and that really speaks to Gen Z. I mean, they love novelty. They love a lot of those sweet, bold, sour, hot flavors. And so, what's an easy way to kind of take your milkshake or your drink and turn it into something really, out there that gets attention? Take the candy brand that's doing well and pop it in there. I actually had the Kraft High, the ketchup smoothie from Tropical Smoothie Cafe, and I have to say, too, that's the difference, is there's some that are really, really thought through well. I think the upcoming, or maybe they're released already, the Oreo Reese's collaboration, there was a great Wall Street Journal article that talked through how they thought through that collaboration and made sure that it was going to be something that really was so delicious and spoke to both brands in a way that was true to them. Whereas other ones, I think are just slapping flavors together and aren't necessarily super delicious. Whereas actually that tropical smoothie drink, it wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't have even clocked it as a ketchup smoothie at first, but it had this deeper, umami, richer flavor that was certainly coming from the ketchup and was delicious. I drank it, and would I order it again? Absolutely. So I think that's the other thing too. Don't just slap things together. There's going to be a lot of consumers who try it and purchase it for the novelty factor, but if they try it and they love it so much, what a great brand experience that they've had. So I think you can, do a little bit better job than just slapping things into other food products that already exist.
Yeah, I think intentionality is definitely important for this, but I'm also just kind of wondering about the market itself. Do you think there's still room for these types of collaborations? Do you think we're at saturated, peak collaboration saturation, I guess you could say? How are you seeing that right now?
At some point, yes. There's only so many things that we can slap into other things. I mean, yeah, will collaborations be around forever? Sure. But, do I think, we're reaching a saturation point? Even just from what we saw at the Fancy Food Show this year, at the Sweets and Snacks Expo this year, I don't think I saw quite as much of it as I had the previous few years. So, yeah, I do think, 2026, 2027, into, the future here, I do think we'll see maybe a little pullback on some of this stuff.
Well, here's a fun one. Do you have any dream collaborations you'd be looking to purchase and be able to have?
Ooh, good question. I love cocktails. I'm just a bit, at a time when nobody's drinking cocktails, and I know every story is that drinking is down. And so when I think of some of the flavors that I would love to see in cocktails, I love like really deep, rich flavors. I would love to see like a root beer collaboration. So there's some type of like root beer, dark brown liquor, so talking about A&W or some of the root beer brands, if they could do something like that, I think would be really, really interesting.
Yeah, I have one that's kind of similar, but it would be Jarritos and Tito's coming together to make
the name alone.
The Jarritito, right? Like, it
yes,
seems like it would work
perfect.
perfectly, and I've done some research at home, so Burritos or Tito's is listening in. You need some a little bit of an update there. I can help you out. But I do think
love that.
Right, but I think to your point earlier, there is room for this. It just has to be intentional and smart and good at the end of the day,
Yes,
right? Like
yes.
at the end of all these conversations, it's unsaid, but like it's got to taste delicious, and that's like what's going to drive it, right? But I do think that there is room here, but I also, to your early point, I think we are kind of getting to that saturation point where like you're going to get lost in the noise unless you have something very unique. So definitely interesting.
Yeah. Maeve has a great story, I'll say really quick, where she went into a Starbucks and she saw a group of young teenagers order whatever the latest, unicorn beverage, whatever it was. And they all ordered it and they went against the wall and they all took pictures with it and they took a sip and they threw it away immediately. And, imagine if they had taken that sip and it was so delicious and they looked at each other, they were like, wow, really surprised. What a better experience that would have been. So, do they necessarily want to come back again to try some of those, new beverages? Not necessarily if they're not having a great taste experience at the end of the day. So agree with you.
I think the last question I'm going to ask here, Mike, is just, completely separate from everything we just talked about. What's going on for the remainder of 2025 that we should be keeping our eyes on? Maybe even taking a look a little bit more towards 2026. What's on your radar right now that the industry should be paying attention to?
Sure. So we're actually getting ready to do the research for that 2026 consumer needs state. So we're thinking through what that survey will look like. I think two of the areas that we're going to look at a lot are, number one, ultra processed foods. Yeah, I think that's probably the area that we're getting asked the most about recently. Do consumers understand what ultra processed foods are? Where do they want ultra processed foods? What do they think about, red dye number 5, 6, 7, 8, all of these various issues. So just kind of putting some numbers around where consumers are thinking. So I think that's the number one issue, trying to kind of figure that out. And then still continued conversations about pricing and value. And the thing that we still continue to say over and over is it is not just price. I think we all understand that at the end of the day. And yet when we go back internally and have those conversations, they tend to still be really focused on price and those value combo meals. And at the end of the day, what matters to the consumer is the value proposition overall. So are they getting the value, the quality for what they're paying? I think the best example is this year, the $10.99 value meal at Chili's is more than twice the cost of a $5 value meal at McDonald's. And it did really well for them because consumers thought that value was there. So it's not necessarily about having a $1, $2 option. And the problem becomes that you lock yourself into those prices for years and years. Even today, consumers still think that the footlong at Subway should be $5. And so think through that value proposition and what you're offering to the consumer. Don't just think through, that race to the bottom to make sure that you have a $1 combo meal constantly. So the price and ultra processed foods, probably the two areas that we're going to focus our attention on the most heading into 2026.
Yeah, the ultra processed food stuff definitely popping up on our radar as well. A lot of consumers are very concerned with this. Maha is obviously also very concerned in this, right? But I think your point about price is really, a good one to keep in mind as well. And Chili's is a great example, right? And it's not even just this year. Some of the comps they're putting up over the last couple of years, right? Still looking at 20+% over a 20%
it's crazy.
Increase the last year.
It's crazy.
And to your point, $10.99 is a great value for full service, restaurants, right? So, and kind of goes back up earlier too, like the cheese pull and being, completely, on the internet, really, like being in social media and people being able to share this experience and kind of like that word of mouth we're talking about. So,
and you're getting a server. Point. Yeah, you're getting a server. There's that connection point. You're getting that human connection too. So exactly everything that we talked about, all in a $10.99 experience.
Very, very interesting. And then my last question, Mike, is just if anyone wants to keep up with Menu Matters, what you're up to, where should they go? What's the best way to keep in touch with you guys?
The best is, menumatters.com is our website, but actually I would say the best is LinkedIn. We post on LinkedIn all the time. Every Friday we do a Friday 5 of things that we've been seeing that are interesting. We post a lot of this type of data. So I'm just Mike Kostyo, Kostyo, on LinkedIn. And then Maeve Webster, the president, is on LinkedIn as well. So that's probably the best place.
And I will vouch the Friday 5 and a lot of the trend spotting stuff you guys share is really, really insightful. I love reading it. So we'll definitely share some links in the description of this episode. But Mike, I just want to say at the end here, really appreciate your insights, really appreciate your partnership with the Food Institute, all you've done for us over the years, and really thankful for helping us kind of launch off Food for Thought leadership here. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.